Warning, this script contains discussion of graphic violence and death. Listener discretion is advised. For 42 years, he ruled Libya with absolute power. On October 20, 2011, he was dragged bleeding from a drainage pipe, begging for mercy. The rebels had him alive on camera. Dozens of witnesses saw him breathing, talking, conscious. So why, within the next 90 minutes, was Muammar Gaddafi dead? What really happened in those final moments? Did he die in crossfire, as the National Transitional Council claimed, or was he executed while in custody? This is the forensic breakdown of the death of a dictator, built entirely from authenticated footage, human rights investigations, and United Nations Commission findings. By the end, you will see the evidence frame by frame, and you will know what the record actually shows. Muammar Gaddafi seized power in Libya in 1969 through a bloodless military coup. He was 27 years old. He toppled King Idris while the monarch vacationed in Turkey, and he promised his people pan-Arab socialism, anti-imperialism, and a third universal theory that would transcend capitalism and communism alike. For more than 4 decades, he ruled without a constitution, without elections, and without mercy for those who opposed him. His security forces disappeared dissidents. His regime sponsored international terrorism. From the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988, to the bombing of a Berlin nightclub in 1986. He was isolated, sanctioned, and then in the 2000s, cautiously rehabilitated by Western governments eager for oil contracts and counterterrorism cooperation. By 2011, he had been in power longer than most Libyans had been alive. Then came the Arab Spring. In December 2010, a fruit vendor in Tunisia set himself on fire to protest police harassment. Within weeks, Tunisia's president had fled. In January 2011, mass protests erupted in Egypt. By February 11th, Hosni Mubarak, who had ruled Egypt for 30 years, resigned. The wave of uprisings swept eastward. On February 15, 2011, protests began in Benghazi, Libya's second-largest city. Gaddafi's response was swift and brutal. Security forces opened fire on demonstrators. Within days, the protests became an armed revolt. Soldiers defected. Eastern Libya fell out of government control. The rebels formed the National Transitional Council and declared themselves the legitimate government. Gaddafi vowed to cleanse Libya house by house, room by room, and to show no mercy to the rats and traitors. On March 17, 2011, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1973, authorizing member states to take all necessary measures to protect civilians. 2 days later, French fighter jets struck Gaddafi's armored columns advancing on Benghazi. The NATO intervention had begun. What followed was an 8-month civil war. The front lines shifted back and forth across the desert. Gaddafi held Tripoli, the capital, and his coastal hometown of Sirte. The rebels, backed by NATO airstrikes and special forces advisors from Qatar, France, and Britain, slowly gained ground. In late August, the rebels stormed Tripoli. Gaddafi's compound was overrun. His regime collapsed, but Gaddafi himself vanished. He reappeared in Sirte, his birthplace, a coastal city of 75,000 people on the Mediterranean. Sirte became the last stronghold of the old regime. By early October 2011, rebel forces, primarily the Misrata brigades who had suffered heavily in the siege of their own city months earlier, surrounded Sirte. They shelled it with artillery. NATO warplanes struck targets inside the city. Water and electricity were cut. Civilians fled when they could. Those who remained huddled in basements. Gaddafi loyalists, including members of his own tribe, the Gaddafi, fought block by block. According to Human Rights Watch, the siege resulted in summary executions, torture of detainees, and the deaths of dozens of civilians caught in the crossfire. The Misrata brigades wanted revenge. They had lost fathers, brothers, sons in the earlier fighting. Sirte was personal. By October 19th, Gaddafi and a group of loyalists, perhaps 75 to 200 people, were trapped in a shrinking pocket in District 2 of Sirte, near the Ouagadougou Conference Center. The area was less than a square kilometer. Rebel forces controlled all roads out of the city. Gaddafi had with him his son Mu'tasim, his defense minister Abubakar Yunis Jabber, his chief of security Mansour Dihau, and a contingent of bodyguards and fighters. They moved between several villas and hid in basements. The end was close. According to later testimony from Mansour Dihau, who survived, Gaddafi knew he was going to die. The plan was to break out and reach open ground, perhaps to rally loyalist tribes in the desert, perhaps simply to die fighting rather than be captured. Before dawn on October 20th, the convoy formed. Estimates vary, but most sources, including the Human Rights Watch investigation published in October 2012, under the title Death of a Dictator, Bloody Vengeance in Sirte, agree there were between 75 and 140 vehicles. Some were armored, most were civilian SUVs and sedans. They carried fighters, family members, and officials. Gaddafi was in a Toyota Land Cruiser. The convoy planned to move fast, heading west toward the outskirts of the city, then south into the desert. They moved out around 8 in the morning, local time. At approximately 8:30 a.m., French warplanes detected the convoy. According to the French Ministry of Defense and confirmed by NATO command in Naples, the convoy was moving at high speed and was assessed to be a military target under the mandate to protect civilians. A French Mirage jet fired a warning shot, then struck the convoy with guided munitions. The convoy scattered. Vehicles burst into flames. Survivors abandoned the burning wreckage and fled on foot. Gaddafi's vehicle was hit or forced to stop near a drainage culvert beside the main highway. Rebel units on the ground, primarily from Misrata, moved in. Gunfire erupted. Some loyalists tried to fight. Others ran. Gaddafi and a handful of men, including Muammar and security personnel, took shelter inside a large concrete drainage pipe that ran beneath the highway. The drainage pipe was roughly a meter in diameter, several dozen meters long. It was dark, hot, and filled with trash. Gaddafi huddled inside with his men, armed with a pistol. For the next 2 to 3 hours, fighting raged around the culvert. Rebel forces, uncertain exactly who was inside, fired rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons into the pipe. Loyalists returned fire. The battle was chaotic. Rebel commanders shouted orders. Fighters from rival brigades competed for glory. Sometime around late morning, according to the Human Rights Watch report, which cites multiple eyewitness interviews conducted in Sirte and Misrata in the weeks following the event, a group of fighters from the Misrata brigade finally stormed the pipe from both ends. They fired inside, killing several of Gaddafi's bodyguards. Then someone shouted. They saw an older man, gray-haired, bloodied, in torn clothing. Someone yelled that it was Gaddafi. He was pulled from the pipe. The cell phone footage begins here. This footage, which spread around the world within hours, was recorded by multiple fighters on multiple devices. No single complete video exists, but fragments have been authenticated by forensic video analysts, including investigators from Human Rights Watch and the United Nations Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry on Libya. The Commission's report, designated a /HRC/19/68 and published in March 2012, examined the footage and testimonies and concluded that Gaddafi was captured alive and appeared conscious and capable of speaking. The video shows Gaddafi dazed, bleeding from wounds to his head and body, surrounded by dozens of shouting fighters. He is standing upright, supported on both sides. Blood is running down his face from a wound above his temple. He is wearing a torn brown shirt soaked with blood. His eyes are open. He looks around, disoriented. Someone shouts, "Do you know right from wrong?" Another voice yells, "This is what you did to us." Gaddafi appears to say, my son, according to lip readers consulted by investigators. Fighters shove him forward. He stumbles. Hands grab at him. Someone holds a pistol to his head. The crowd surges. The footage is shaky, chaotic, but several things are clear. Gaddafi is alive. He is moving under his own power. He is speaking. He is bleeding, but he is conscious. Then, very briefly, clearer footage emerges. Gaddafi is on the hood of a pickup truck propped up by fighters. Blood streams from his head. His shirt is torn open. A fighter jabs at him with a knife or bayonet. Another slaps his head. Gaddafi raises his hand, perhaps in defense, perhaps pleading. The crowd roars. Chance of God is great, and this is for Misrata echo in the background. The camera jostles. Gaddafi is pulled down from the truck. The footage cuts. What happens next is the central question. Between the last authenticated footage of Gaddafi alive on the hood of the truck around noon and the appearance of his corpse approximately 90 minutes later, Muammar Gaddafi died. The National Transitional Council's official statement, delivered by Prime Minister Mahmoud Jibril on October 20th, claimed that Gaddafi was killed in crossfire during fighting between loyalists and rebel forces after his capture. Jibril stated that Gaddafi was probably hit in the crossfire. The NTC Justice Minister Mohammed Al-Alaghi later said Gaddafi died from bullet wounds sustained when loyalists tried to free him and rebels fought back. This became the official version: crossfire, fog of war, no one specifically responsible. The forensic evidence tells a different story. Human Rights Watch dispatched investigators to Sirte within days of Gaddafi's death. They interviewed over 60 witnesses, including rebel fighters present at the scene, hospital staff who examined the body, and residents who filmed the events. They collected and analyzed video footage, still photographs, and medical records. Their report, published 1 year later in October 2012, states the following. Quote, Gaddafi was alive when captured and appeared to have died within several hours of being taken into custody. The evidence strongly suggests he was killed in custody by armed militiamen from Misrata. The wounds shown on the body of Muammar Gaddafi are inconsistent with the NTC's claim that he was killed in crossfire. End quote. The United Nations Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry reached a similar conclusion. The commission, mandated to examine violations of international humanitarian law in Libya, analyzed the available video and testimonies. Their report states, quote, the available evidence suggests that Muammar Gaddafi was captured alive while attempting to flee his convoy after a NATO airstrike. Video footage shows him alive in the hands of armed militia members. He appears to have been shot in custody and died as a result. The commission finds that there is sufficient evidence to conclude that his death was an extrajudicial execution. End quote. Let's look at the medical findings. Gaddafi's body was taken to Misrata, about 200 kilometers west of Sirte, and placed in a commercial meat freezer in a shopping center. For 4 days, the public was allowed to view the corpse. Doctors who examined the body reported multiple gunshot wounds. 1 bullet entered his head from close range. A doctor identified as Dr. Ibrahim Al-Farani told Reuters that the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Another doctor, speaking to Al Jazeera, said the wound was to the temple, consistent with an execution-style shot. Gaddafi also had a wound to the abdomen, a wound to the chest, and bruising and cuts consistent with beatings. Photographs published in the international press show Gaddafi's body laid out on a mattress in the freezer, stripped to the waist, his face swollen, a large wound visible on the left side of his head. The forensic timeline is critical. At approximately noon, the authenticated cell phone videos show Gaddafi alive, bleeding, abused, but conscious. By early afternoon, between 1 and 2 p.m., photographs circulate showing Gaddafi dead. The transition from alive to dead happens off camera. No video has ever emerged of Gaddafi being shot in crossfire. No video shows loyalist fighters attempting to free him after his initial capture. No video shows a gunfight in which Gaddafi could have been accidentally killed. The only authenticated footage shows him alive, in custody, surrounded by dozens of rebel fighters, with no loyalist forces anywhere near. Multiple eyewitnesses told Human Rights Watch that they saw a fighter shoot Gaddafi while he was being held. One fighter, interviewed in Misrata, stated that Gaddafi was shot in the stomach by a young fighter who pushed through the crowd, shouted, "This is for my brother," and fired. Another witness said Gaddafi was shot in the head while lying on the ground, bleeding from earlier wounds. These accounts vary in detail, but they converge on one point. Gaddafi was shot while helpless, surrounded, and in the custody of armed men who had every reason to want him dead. The legal term is extrajudicial killing. Under international humanitarian law, a captured combatant must be protected from violence once in custody. Summary execution, even of an enemy leader, is a war crime. Gaddafi, regardless of his decades of brutality, had a right under the laws of war to be taken alive, tried, and held accountable in a court of law. The National Transitional Council had promised it would hand Gaddafi over to the International Criminal Court, which had issued a warrant for his arrest for crimes against humanity in June 2011. That never happened. Instead, Gaddafi was killed by militia members who answered to no central authority and faced no immediate consequences. Now, let's address the NTC's claims directly. The crossfire story falls apart under scrutiny. If Gaddafi had been killed in a firefight during his capture, why do all the authenticated videos show him alive after the fighting ended? If loyalists tried to free him and rebels fought them off, where is the video or photographic evidence of that firefight? Where are the bodies of the loyalist rescuers? Where are the wounded rebels? None have been documented. The Human Rights Watch report specifically notes that no evidence supports the crossfire narrative. The UN Commission echoes this conclusion. The fighters themselves, in interviews, do not describe a firefight after Gaddafi's capture. They describe chaos, anger, revenge, and at least one deliberate shooting. There is also the matter of Muammar Gaddafi, Muammar's son, who was captured alive from the same drainage pipe. Video and photographs show Muammar sitting calmly, smoking a cigarette, hours after his father's death. He has a bandage on his neck. He looks uninjured otherwise. By the next day, Muammar is dead, his body displayed beside his father's in the freezer. Doctors report he was shot. No explanation is given. The pattern is clear. Capture, then killing, not crossfire but execution. The weight of evidence, therefore, supports a single conclusion. Muammar Gaddafi was captured alive, abused, and killed in custody within hours. The footage, the eyewitness accounts, the medical findings, and the independent investigations all point to an extrajudicial killing, not a death in crossfire. This is not speculation. This is the most defensible reading of the authenticated record. The balance of evidence, as assessed by Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, and independent journalists, is that Gaddafi was executed while helpless. Why does this matter? Because what happened to Gaddafi in those 90 minutes set the pattern for everything that followed in Libya. The rule of law, fragile and contested, evaporated in the moment of triumph. The fighters who killed Gaddafi were never prosecuted. The National Transitional Council did not investigate. The promise of a new Libya, built on justice and accountability, died with Gaddafi on that roadside. Within hours of his death, Gaddafi's body was paraded through the streets of Misrata. Thousands lined the roads. Fighters fired guns into the air. Children climbed onto trucks to take photographs. The body was then placed in the freezer at the shopping center. For 4 days, the public was invited to view it. Long lines formed. Men, women, and children filed past. Some spat on the corpse. Some took selfies. The spectacle was broadcast around the world. Leaders in Western capitals, who had supported the NATO intervention, expressed relief that Gaddafi was gone, but also discomfort at the manner of his death. United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, told of Gaddafi's death during a television interview, exclaimed, "We came, we saw, he died," then laughed. The clip circulated widely and was criticized for appearing to celebrate a lawless killing. On the night of October 24th, 5 days after his death, Gaddafi's body and that of his son Muammar were buried in a secret location in the desert. The NTC feared the grave would become a shrine or a rallying point for loyalists. Only a handful of officials and fighters knew the location. To this day, the site has never been publicly disclosed. The final indignity. A dictator who once commanded armies and built monuments to himself buried in an unmarked hole in the sand, his grave known to no one. The death of Gaddafi did not bring peace. Within months, the coalition of militias that had fought together against the regime began to fracture. Libya had no functioning army, no unified police, no agreed-upon constitution. The National Transitional Council, composed of exiles, defectors, and regional representatives, had no real power outside Tripoli. The militias that controlled the streets answered to their own commanders, their own cities, their own tribes. Weapons flooded the country. Estimates suggest that by the end of 2011, Libya had more guns than people. The armories Gaddafi had stockpiled for decades were looted. Anti-aircraft missiles, rocket launchers, rifles, millions of rounds of ammunition, all distributed among dozens of armed groups. Elections were held in July 2012. The General National Congress was elected. It was supposed to draft a constitution and hand power to a permanent government. Instead, it became paralyzed by infighting. Islamist factions, led by the Muslim Brotherhood affiliate the Justice and Construction Party, clashed with liberal and nationalist factions. The militias that guarded the parliament made and unmade alliances. Assassinations became common. In Benghazi, judges, journalists, and security officials were murdered. In Tripoli, the prime minister was briefly kidnapped by a militia in October 2013. In 2014, the conflict exploded into a full-scale civil war. 2 rival parliaments emerged. The General National Congress, backed by Islamist militias from Misrata and supported by Turkey and Qatar, held Tripoli. The House of Representatives, elected in June 2014, but forced to flee to the eastern city of Tobruk, was backed by General Khalifa Haftar. a former Gaddafi officer who had defected in the 1980s and returned during the revolution. Haftar launched Operation Dignity, a campaign against Islamist militias in Benghazi and across the east. He was supported by Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, France, and Russia. Libya now had two governments, two armies, and two visions for the country. Foreign powers poured in support. Turkey sent military advisors, drones, and mercenaries from Syria to support the Tripoli government. Russia's Wagner Group deployed contractors to support Haftar's forces. The UAE flew airstrikes. Egypt provided weapons. Qatar funded Islamist militias. Libya became a proxy battleground. The humanitarian cost was staggering. Thousands were killed. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. Migrants from sub-Saharan Africa who had once transited through Libya on their way to Europe found themselves trapped in detention centers run by militias, subjected to torture, slavery, and extortion. The United Nations called the conditions crimes against humanity. In 2015, ISIS seized control of Sirte, the city where Gaddafi had died. Militants, many of them veterans of the Syrian and Iraqi conflicts, established a base and declared an emirate. For over a year, they controlled a 100-kilometer stretch of coastline. They beheaded prisoners, crucified opponents, and used the city as a staging ground for attacks in Tunisia and Egypt. In 2016, militia forces backed by United States airstrikes launched a campaign to retake Sirte. The battle lasted 7 months. The city, already devastated by the siege of 2011, was destroyed again. By December 2016, ISIS was pushed out. Sirte was rubble. By 2020, General Haftar controlled most of eastern and southern Libya. The Tripoli government, backed by Turkish drones and Syrian fighters, controlled the west and the capital. In April 2019, Haftar launched an offensive to take Tripoli. The assault lasted 14 months. Over 2,000 people were killed. The city was shelled daily. Civilians fled. Schools and hospitals were hit. In June 2020, Turkish intervention turned the tide. Drones destroyed Haftar's armored columns. His forces retreated. A ceasefire was declared in October 2020. A unity government was formed in early 2021 under the auspices of the United Nations. Elections were scheduled for December 2021. They were postponed. As of today, Libya remains divided, fragile, and heavily armed. The chaos that consumed Libya was not inevitable. It was a direct consequence of the manner in which Gaddafi's regime fell. The NATO intervention decapitated the state but provided no plan for what came next. The rebel forces that took power were militias, not a unified army. They had fought together, but they had no shared vision for governance. The moment Gaddafi was killed, they turned on each other. And the manner of his death, lawless, vengeful, celebrated, set the precedent. If the dictator could be executed in a ditch without trial, then so could anyone. Justice became synonymous with revenge. The rule of law became a slogan with no substance. This is the legacy of October 20, 2011. The death of Muammar Gaddafi was not the end of tyranny. It was the beginning of anarchy. The forensic evidence shows he was captured alive and killed in custody. That killing, never investigated, never punished, became the template for a decade of violence. The fighters who killed him were heroes in Misrata. They were never held accountable. The militias they belonged to became power brokers, kingmakers, and warlords. The international community, which had authorized the intervention to protect civilians, walked away when the hard work of rebuilding began. Libya was left to fend for itself, and it tore itself apart. So what should have happened? Under international law, Gaddafi should have been captured, protected, and transferred to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. He should have faced trial for crimes against humanity, for the Lockerbie bombing, for the disappearances, for the torture, for the decades of repression. He should have been forced to answer for his actions in a court of law, where victims and survivors could confront him, where evidence could be examined, where justice could be seen to be done. That did not happen. Instead, he died in a ditch, his death filmed on cell phones, his body paraded and mocked. And the promise of a new Libya, a Libya built on justice, died with him. Today, Libya is a fractured state. Oil production, the lifeblood of the economy, is hostage to militia control of fields and export terminals. The central bank, the one national institution with real power, is contested by rival governments. Migration routes through Libya to Europe have become billion-dollar industries controlled by armed groups who traffic human beings. Russia has a permanent military presence through Wagner bases in the east and south. Turkey has bases and drones in the west. Egypt and the UAE continue to fund proxies. The United Nations mission in Libya has been trying to broker peace since 2011. It has brokered ceasefires, national dialogues, and power-sharing agreements. None have held. The Libyan people, who rose up in February 2011 seeking dignity, freedom, and an end to authoritarianism, have paid the price. A generation has grown up in a state of conflict. Universities have closed, infrastructure has collapsed. The healthcare system, such as it was, is crippled. Young Libyans who can afford to leave do so. The country that once had the highest standard of living in Africa, thanks to oil wealth, is now a byword for chaos. This was not inevitable. It was a choice. The choice to prioritize revenge over justice. The choice to celebrate a dictator's death rather than demand accountability. The choice to abandon state building the moment the old regime fell. Libya's collapse is the direct result of those choices. Let's return to the central question. Was Muammar Gaddafi killed in crossfire or executed in custody? The primary footage, the eyewitness testimonies, the medical evidence, and the independent investigations by Human Rights Watch and the United Nations Human Rights Council all converge on a single answer. Gaddafi was captured alive, wounded but conscious, and died in the custody of armed militiamen within hours. The balance of evidence supports the conclusion that his death was an extrajudicial killing, not a death in crossfire. This is not speculation. This is the most defensible reading of the authenticated record. The official story, promoted by the National Transitional Council, does not withstand scrutiny. It is contradicted by the videos, the witnesses, and the medical findings. Why does it matter that we get this right? Because historical accuracy is the foundation of justice. When we accept convenient narratives that obscure inconvenient truths, we enable impunity. When we allow executions to be rebranded as combat deaths, we corrode the rule of law. And when we forget that even dictators have rights under international humanitarian law, we make it easier for the next atrocity to happen. Gaddafi was a brutal dictator. He deserved to face trial. He did not deserve to be beaten, abused, and shot while helpless. Those two things are not contradictory. They are both true. And Libya's tragedy is that the second prevented the first. The story of Gaddafi's death is a story about the fragility of justice in the midst of revolution. It is a story about how the thirst for revenge can overwhelm the promise of accountability. It is a story about the consequences of lawlessness, even when that lawlessness is aimed at a tyrant. And it is a warning. When we cheer for extrajudicial killings, when we celebrate mob justice, when we excuse violence because the victim was evil, we are building a world where might makes right and the strong can kill with impunity. That is not justice. That is not liberation. That is the logic of the dictator recycled. The record is clear. Gaddafi was captured alive. He was killed in custody. The evidence is public, documented, and authenticated. Anyone can review the Human Rights Watch report, the United Nations Commission findings, and the cell phone footage. All the sources have been cited throughout this investigation. The full bibliography, including direct links to the Human Rights Watch report titled Death of a Dictator, Bloody Vengeance, insert. The United Nations Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry report, designated a /HRC/19/68, and the UK Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee report on Libya, is available in the description and the pinned comment. Read the sources yourself. Watch the footage yourself. The evidence speaks. This has been a forensic deep dive into the death of Muammar Gaddafi on October 20, 2011. The goal was not sensationalism, but clarity. The goal was to answer a historical question with evidence, not assumptions. The verdict is that the available evidence, assessed by credible independent investigators, shows Gaddafi was captured alive and killed in custody, and that this killing was an extrajudicial execution that violated international humanitarian law. That conclusion is not comfortable. It complicates the narrative of liberation, but it is what the record shows, and it matters because Libya's collapse can be traced to that moment when law gave way to vengeance. If you found this investigation valuable, please subscribe for more evidence-based historical deep dives. Check the pinned comment and description for full sources and timestamps, and leave a comment. Do you believe the evidence supports the conclusion that Gaddafi was executed? Do you think justice required a trial? Do you think the manner of his death contributed to Libya's collapse? The debate is open. The sources are public. History is not settled until we settle it together. Thank you for listening.